Ladies and gentlemen,
Right,
welcome.
yeah.
It is so good to see you here for multiple reasons. We've been doing these live on Facebook, which has been fun, but no one on the crew laughs at my jokes, so it's good to be recording live in front of a studio audience again, so that my self-esteem can be repaired. I'm Rob Klein. I'm the host of Oral Histories Live here at the History Center, a program that is supported by the great Mike and Esther Wilson, so if you would thank them. They always sit right about there, so I always feel like I better not screw the thing up, because they can reach me. I'm also grateful. At first, I just noticed there were Cardinals fans in the room, but former victim of the program, Kerry J. Hahn, is here. If you missed his Oral Histories Live presentation, it and all of the other previous editions of this program are available on the History Center website, so you can laugh at my jokes at home, which seems good all the way around. Boy, tough room. Okay, tonight our guest is former Gazette columnist and columnist? Were you colonizing the Gazette? Former Gazette columnist and man about town, Dave Rasdal, if you'd help me join.
Hello.
Welcome, Dave. All right, Dave, we tend to start at the beginning. I have some notes about your early life, including your arrival in Spencer just in time to graduate from high school. But why don't you tell the folks a little bit about the early years of your life?
Well, I'm a born and bred Iowan. I was born in Lake City, Iowa, which is not too far from Fort Dodge, and it doesn't have a lake. I don't know where it got its name, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's what happens when you don't let the marketing directors name your town.
And then I grew up in Marshalltown and moved to Spencer when I was in a sophomore in high school.
And so he graduated from high school with my boss at Hansher, Chuck Swanson. So that's all the fancy people were in Spencer in the early 1970s. So
Rob says he knows everything he knows about Spencer came from Chuck.
And Chuck talks about Spencer a lot. So
and we are going to have our 50th high school class reunion this August.
That must be right, because
that's when history becomes important to you, when you start having your 50th high school class reunion, you know?
That reminds me, I was born in 1971, so I suppose... Dang it. All right. Okay, so let's move on from 1971 and talk about college. Where'd you go to college?
Since I grew up in Marshalltown, I'd always thought I'd go to the University of Iowa. But once we moved up to the cold corner of Iowa, I just didn't really want to travel almost 300 miles to college. So I found out that out-of-state tuition at the University of South Dakota was less than in-state tuition at the University of Iowa at that time. That's really pretty hard to believe. And it was only 120 miles away. Far enough to be away from the folks, but yet close enough to come home. But boy, you live in South Dakota, and I'll tell you, there's nothing to stop the wind. You know? Even though I was in, eastern South Dakota, I mean, it's got the whole state to blow across. So after I graduated in '75, I was fortunate enough to get my first full-time newspaper job at the Spencer Daily Reporter. I had done my summer internship the year before, in 1974. My job at that time was to cover the world's greatest county fair. Now, some people might dispute that, but if you've ever been to the Clay County Fair in Spencer, it lasts 8 days, and it draws people from 3 states. It kind of rivals the state fair.
It absolutely does.
It's amazing.
As fairs go,
it's amazing. And so my job, that summer internship, I spent the whole summer putting together a 6-page special section for the fair, and then I had to, this fair isn't until September, so it's after the state fair even. But then I had to spend that 8 days of the fair covering the fair. So when I went back to college, I was 2 weeks late. That was fine. I even got 3 hours of credit for my summer internship, so no problem, so I mean, it was great. So I worked at the Spencer paper for a while, couple months. They got rid of the sports editor, so I became sports editor there for a while. The Daily Reporter was owned by Mid-America Publishing, which at the time also put out the Iowan magazine. They were based in Shenandoah, and you're familiar with Shenandoah.
I am. Yes, spent a few formative years there myself.
But I never went to Shenandoah for that job, but I ended up getting a job at the Cedar Valley Daily Times in Vinton, figuring that if I was in eastern Iowa, I would have a better opportunity to go to a larger newspaper. When you're young, you have these aspirations, and that's what I wanted to do, was get to a larger paper.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about that. So you're covering the Clay County Fair, you're suddenly thrust into being the sports reporter, but when you were a young and hungry journalist in South Dakota, what was the beat you were imagining for yourself?
Oh, I did not get into newspapers for newspapers' sake. I think I read today, is supposed to be National Teacher Appreciation Day. Is that right? Okay. So I really appreciate the English teacher I had when I was a sophomore in high school in Marshalltown. This was the first half of my sophomore year. Then we moved to Spencer. But she encouraged me to write. And I really enjoyed that. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to become the next great American novelist. I loved, Steinbeck and Fitzgerald. I wasn't that hot on Hemingway. And I watched Hemingway the other day, and I kind of understand, the Ken Burns special.
And you're still not that hot.
I can understand why, yeah. But Hemingway is a very interesting character, whatever. But anyway, I got into journalism because that's what I wanted to do, was to write the great American novel. Figuring 5 years, 10 years, then I could do it. Well, I don't know. It didn't really work out that way.
Well, yeah, but it will eventually work out, and we will get there. So Dave and I both spent time as newspapermen in Vinton, Iowa. He at the Cedar Valley Times, myself at the National Hawkeye Racing News, which is a story for another time. I'm sure I really do strike you as a dirt track racing journalist, but I was an award-winning dirt track racing journalist.
And you want to run that track 5 years?
Yeah, I wrote for that paper for 5 long years. How long were you at the Cedar Valley Times?
I was at the Cedar Valley Daily Times about 20 months.
And then the Gazette came calling.
Well, then I applied for a job at the Gazette. That was an interesting little thing too there. It would have been near Christmas of 1978. I was frustrated. I wanted to go to a larger paper. I just took an afternoon off and came down to the Gazette, walked in, said, I want to apply for a job as a newspaper reporter. He said, well, you have to fill out this application. I said, well, I've got a resume right here. No, you got to fill out this application. Well, the woman who was at the desk apparently knew that they had an opening. So she went and got Mary Collins, who came out, looked at my resume, said, don't worry about filling out the application. I sat down, talked to her, ended up in the managing editor's office. We talked for a little bit. Then I went back to the Times in Vinton, went on Christmas break. When I came back, why, I hadn't heard anything. So I called them up and they said, we called a couple times. We wanted to bring you back for an interview. Didn't anybody tell you? Well, they had talked to my boss, who decided not to tell me. That the Gazette, this is my immediate boss, who decided not to tell me that the Gazette wanted to talk to me. Anyway, so I did an interview at the Gazette then a couple days later. Before I left, I was offered the job. I said, let me think about it. I knew I was going to take it. I knew I was going to make, half again as much money. I was going to be a larger market, exactly what I wanted to do at that stage in my life. I went back to the Times in Vinton, and my boss's boss, who was the publisher of the newspaper, told me, he said, Dave, I heard you took yesterday afternoon off to interview for a job at the Gazette. I said, yeah. He says, well, do you think we should pay you for something like that? I said, his name is Dick. I said, Dick, I'm salary. I said, I go take pictures Tuesday nights and Friday nights at sporting events. I'm working for you for 60 hours a week. If you feel you need to dock me a half a day's pay for going to the interview in Cedar Rapids, that's fine. But I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice.
And did he dock your pay?
No, he didn't.
Good for
And
him.
we remained friends after that and whatever. He understood totally. He was just trying to be the boss.
Fair enough. So it's your, if I understood correctly, your first day at the Cedar Rapids Gazette, things don't exactly go your way on your commute.
January 23rd, 1979, a Tuesday, we must have gotten 8 or 10 inches of snow that day before. I was supposed to be to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get there till 10. Here, first day at work, and I thought I was going to get fired for being late, but of course not, because they understood. But I got stuck on a side road that I thought would be clear. It wasn't clear. I had to take a long way around. Thank goodness they understood, and it ended up being a long Gazette career then.
Right, there you go. From the fear of it being a very short Gazette career. So
right.
That worked out well. So your first beats there at the Gazette, you were doing general assignments and obituaries. Is that,
I did.
Is that right?
I was a jack of all trades as far as the newspaper business goes. For both, a lot of the time when I was in Spencer, even though I did sports, and then in Vinton, I covered, supervisors and city council. Like I said, took sports pictures, so all kinds of things. So I was used to doing all that stuff. So when the Gazette hired me, I worked Tuesday through Saturday. And Tuesday, Wednesday, I would write feature stories or a news story. On Thursday and Friday, I would fill in on beats. The Gazette at that time was an afternoon paper, for one thing, at that time. We didn't go mornings till 81. But so it was an afternoon paper, and a lot of different people had beats, and there were like 6 or 7 people that had beats that would, every 7th week, would have to do the night shift on Friday and Saturday nights, because nobody, of course, wanted to do that. And so when somebody who was covering education would do the weekend night beat, then I would cover their beat on Thursday and Friday. And then maybe it'd be the courthouse the next week, and then maybe it was City Hall, and then maybe it was Lynn County government. So I got to know all kinds of different people all over the city. Saturday, I didn't go to work till 2. And I worked on the state pages, which included taking obituaries, which often was dictated by a funeral director at that time. We had, I don't know if we even had fax machines in 79, did we?
No.
Huh?
No. Nope.
Okay. Yeah, so we didn't even have to, so we're taking them, orally. And these are not paid obituaries either. So we had a style, and we followed that style. And so I had to make sure that it was all right, all the obituaries right, and everything else for Sunday's paper, which is the largest circulation paper. And so I found out really quickly what kind of a responsibility that was, because, Sunday afternoon, if I didn't have it right, Phyllis Fleming, my boss, would let me know about it, huh? Right? Does that make sense? It does, yeah.
I can hear Phyllis, actually. All right, so you do that for a while, but 3 years in, the thing that will make you famous in Eastern Iowa, 1982, we develop
82 is when I started Ramblin', but before that, I became Eastern Iowa reporter. And Eastern Iowa reporter allowed me to pretty much be on my own and go anywhere I wanted to do feature stories and news stories, of course, too, in the basically 17-county area that the Gazette covered, from Decorah down to Washington, over into the edge of Jackson County to Tama, Toledo area. Just kind of a big, looked like a state if you really wanted to kind of look at the territory. And I started that in, I want to say September of 81. And we talked about doing a column for several months before we finally came up with it in the spring of '82.
And so was that, you didn't go in and pitch the concept
Oh,
whole cloth, it was sort of a collaborative.
Mark Bowden was the state editor at that time. He eventually became managing editor of the paper, but he was the state editor and my direct report at that time. No, anyway, he was assistant state editor. But anyway, he and I kind of came up with the idea, and he wanted me to come up with a name, and I couldn't come up with any better name than what he picked. So he's the one that picked the name.
Apostrophe and all? Was the apostrophe his idea?
Uh-huh.
We drop our G's, apparently.
Yep.
And if you had to give the elevator speech for what you thought Ramblin' was on day one, how would you have described it?
Pretty much exactly as it turned out. It was about people, places, and things in eastern Iowa. When I interviewed for the job at the Gazette, and maybe even when I talked to them about doing the eastern Iowa beat, I told them there's a million people out there and everybody's got their own story. And they do. And that's what I love more. I always said it was about people, places, and things. The people were the best, though, because you'd talk to the people and they would give you their stories. And I think, as I told you earlier, sometimes it just would amaze me. A lot of reporters were in a big hurry to get in and out of doing stories. I learned that you got to sit down with somebody and earn their trust for a while. So we'd sit and we'd talk for a half hour, 45 minutes. Before then, I'd really get into the story and start asking them some questions. And I was just shocked sometimes at the things that people would say. I mean, they're telling me some of their life secrets that they wouldn't even tell, their kids or their neighbor or anything else. And here I am taking down notes.
You're going to put it in the paper.
But they trusted me and whatever, and it was just great. I remember the one thing that I was telling you too, that and you have to trust the idea when I was get ideas, of this being a subject worth writing about. There were times though when I would kind of get trapped. Somebody would tell me that this was a great person to talk to. And they did. They had a good history, sounded really good, but they just really weren't the talkative type. And so I'd sit there and I'd ask them questions, and they'd nod their head. Or they'd answer yes, or they'd answer no. And Kerry's back there listening, because he knows what I'm talking about. And there were several times when that's when you earn your pay. It's when you're sitting there and you're trying to do the best you can with that and make it come out to be a good story. And I'll tell you, on more than 2 or 3 occasions, I got a call from the person the next day who said, "Thank you for the story. I didn't know I was that interesting."
This, of course, is why we vet our guests for Oral Histories Live so carefully to make sure that they won't just nod their head at me. So that be a challenge. So things are going great. You've got this column. Everybody loves you. It's 1986, and you leave the Gazette. What's that all about?
I had a dream to become a novelist. And several other people left, and I found out that I had enough money in my retirement account to abscond with it and probably live for about 6 or 8 months. And so I thought that's what I'd do. I was single, so I didn't have to worry about kids or anything like that at the time. And but I also knew that I needed to make some money too. So I took a couple months and did some writing and stuff. But then I started working with Ed Gorman for a while.
Now, do we all know who Ed Gorman is? The late Ed Gorman is, for my money, the finest mystery and thriller writer ever to live in this town. And I say that knowing that John Sanford is from this town. So if you haven't read Ed Gorman's work, I cannot commend it to you highly enough. I also recommend his wife, Carol Gorman's work as well, although much of it is for young readers. So Ed's got a magazine. It's called Mystery Scene at the time. He is running an ad agency, right?
He's also running an ad agency, and so I did some work for him for the ad agency and also some book reviews for Mystery Scene, a couple interviews for that. But then I discovered I really wasn't making quite enough money doing that either. And let's see, it would have been around December of '86, I started writing Night Beat, and I finished the first draft, and I want to say maybe March. And so then I needed to make some more money, and so I was looking around, and I saw an ad in the Gazette for somebody to run a one-person resume writing office, or operate it. So I applied for that, went to the interview, got the job, started that in May or June of that year, with the idea that I would sit in this office and just wait for people to call. Well, and so there were days when nobody would call. Perfect to be sitting there writing, working on my own writing without being interrupted. I mean, it was just fantastic. Then there'd be other days where the phone would ring off the hook, you know, and it was just, and it would always work that way, you know. You're working on one resume, you're getting ready to get rid of that person, 2 other people come in and the phone rings and it's crazy. And I didn't make any money unless I sold a resume, so hey, I wanted to sell some of those, so it was fine. And
okay, so just to recap, he wanted to be a novelist when he was in college. He ends up at the Gazette.
When I was in high school.
Or in high school,
even,
he
right.
ends up at the Gazette. He leaves the Gazette because he wants to be a novelist. He starts working on a book called Night Beats. Keep that in mind. We're going to get back to it. But first, you're going to go literally rambling across the country.
Working with the resume office, this was a national company. They had something like more than 500 offices around the country. And they liked what I was doing. They said, would you like to be in charge of several offices? I said, sure. Where would you want to go? I said, anywhere except LA or New York City. Okay, so they called me about 2 days later. They said, how about Virginia? That sounds like fun. So I did some research on it. I called him back. I said, yeah, let me talk to you a little bit more about going to Virginia. They said, too late. I said, what do you mean too late? They offered it to somebody else and they took it. I said, okay, fine then. Keep me on the list, you know, or whatever. So about 2 days later, they called and said, well, how about San Jose, California? Sure, that sounds like a good deal. Let me take a look into that for a little bit. When do I need to let you know? They said, how about 24 hours? So I said, okay, fine. So I did some research, talked to a couple people, called them up and said, yep. So in November of '87, I moved out to California and I was in charge of 13 resume offices. Then they canned somebody else and I all of a sudden was in charge of 25 resume offices. And these were all around the San Francisco Bay Area, from Santa Cruz up to Santa Rosa, included 4 offices in San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, you know, all just the whole Bay Area, you know. I enjoyed living there, but I didn't enjoy working 80 hours a week.
Well, and this is 80 hours a week. This has got to be an industry that's been nearly wiped out by the internet, right?
This was 1987, so people were still buying
Doing
them.
it, yeah.
And we had a computer. Some people had their own computer, but they still needed help doing resumes and this and that stuff. But we were a little bit behind. Anyway, I mean, I was just running around like crazy, and it was just too much for me to take, and I didn't have the help, I didn't have the equipment, but I knew how to write a resume, you know. So I applied and got a different job, and the job I got was working for Skyway Freight Systems doing public relations writing for this company. It was founded by some people that were originally from Oklahoma and from New York, and people that worked there were not native Californians, they were from all over. I had friends from Australia and Hawaii, and my best friends were like from Ohio, you know, because they knew that people from other areas worked harder than people in California. That was their philosophy anyway, whatever, you know. And I worked and we did great and whatever, and it was just, it was a great job. But again, it wasn't affording me the time to write on my own. And really, it got to the point where that didn't really matter because they had a downsizing and I was gone. So, but I had a great relationship with my immediate boss, and so she decided to set up her own company with her husband who was in the advertising business. So I'm kind of back doing similar things that I did when I worked for Ed Gorman. Have a little bit of time to do some freelance writing and writing on my own. But still not enough. And October of '89,
World Series time.
the earthquake hit. And I don't know if you remember watching that World Series, but your TV was on, but mine was not. I was about 15 miles from the epicenter, and my television went off before coverage was even disrupted. And if you've never been through an earthquake, I don't recommend it. I'd felt them ever since I was there. About once a month, you feel the ground kind of just tremble a little bit. You know, it's no big deal. And then with this one, it lasted, the first shock was about 20 seconds. And I think it ended up being a 7-1. But, I mean, the whole house is shaking. My TV went off. Dishes are coming out of the kitchen cabinets. You know, you got the cat running around like not knowing what's going on. I'm huddling under a doorway. You think it's done? No. 30 seconds later, a 15-second aftershock. I don't remember how many aftershocks we had in the first 24 hours, but it was unbelievable. I want to say 50. I mean, it was unbelievable. It just would not stop.
And Mark Bowden of the Gazette
Rescued me.
pounces.
No, but he knew that I would look at, was thinking about coming back. Although this is what's funny too, though, Rob, is I kept in good contact with people at the Gazette and whatever. I couldn't call out. I couldn't call my parents. I couldn't call my brother, my sister. I couldn't call anybody to let them know that I was okay with this earthquake. But then my phone rings. It's a Gazette reporter. What?
Intrepid.
Hey, so you survived the earthquake. Tell us about it. So I was quoted in the next day's Gazette about this California earthquake. Again, never burn bridges, you know. I kept in contact with people at the Gazette. Mark Bowden would say, when are you coming back? Not yet. When are you coming back? Not yet. When are you coming back? Let's talk about it. So I ended
Drove
up...
a hard bargain, right? You had one requirement.
Well, I had one request too, though, and I said, this was when the Gazette was still going really good, and in fact they expanded. And this is when they came up with the Iowa Today section, and they'd always did some zoning, but they were going to get more intense on the zoning, which is a final edition, which is basically Lynn County, and then the North Edition, which was north of Highway 30, South Edition, which was south of Highway 30. Dave Gosh was the Eastern Iowa reporter at that time, but they decided to split it up, so they're going to have an opening for another Eastern Iowa reporter. So that's the job that I took. I took the North Zone, he took the South Zone. But I took it with the understanding that my Ramblin' column, which had been 1 day a week before I left in '86, would eventually be able to go to 3 columns a week, and that would become my primary job. Mark did the best he could to promise, but it took a little while. It was probably 4 or 5 months till I wrote my first column, and it was only in the North Edition. Of course, then I went in and I said, you know what? People in Eastern Iowa, there's somebody from Decorah, and now their relatives live in Cedar Rapids, Washington, Iowa. You know, they live in Vinton, you know. I mean, if you're going to pay me what you're paying me, my column needs to be in all editions. That's what I told them, you know. And finally they listened. It was in all editions. Then I got to 2, then I got to 3. And so I just got to 3.
That's even more impressive than in convincing Bowden to pay your moving expenses to come home.
Oh, he did that too?
That was part of the deal.
He did that? Yeah, oh yeah, he did that too. Yeah. Well, I figured you might as well try.
Right.
You don't know unless you ask.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. But I had just gotten that up to the 3 times a week, and then I got beat up.
I don't think that was in our pre-interview.
Wasn't
Dave.
it? Okay.
We are now going off the script to talk about the time Dave was beat up.
Just quickly, but I'm sure some people remember that. You know? It was in 82, or no, 90. Yeah, it was in 92. 92, because I came back in August of 90. Yeah. And so that delayed that a little bit.
Wait, you can't just say, and then I got beat up.
Well, no, I'd been out bowling, and I like to go to Xavier's, and so I was going down to Xavier's, which is now China Inn.
Sure.
Down there at 14th Street, First Avenue. as I'm going down there, some kids are behind me with bright lights on, and I pulled over and to let them go by, and they didn't go by, and finally they did go by, you know, and so, I don't know, I flashed my bright lights at them to let them know they were clear and that I was upset. Well, little did I know that they were going to follow me to Xavier's parking lot, and about 4 of them jumped me as I got in my car. They started hitting me and kicking me. I ended up rolling under the car to get away. They stole my wallet, broke my glasses, broke the mirror on my car. They were trying to break a window, but they couldn't do that. I walked in and saw my friend sitting there, and he says, man, he says, how much have you had to drink? I said, like 2 beers. I said, I just got beat up in the parking lot. He says, what? Yeah. There were a couple nurses there. They looked me over, took me to the hospital. You know, I was okay, took me home. But this friend had to spend the night with me because if you might have a concussion, they don't want you to fall asleep, which could maybe then cause some other problems or whatever. So he had to make sure that I was awake every hour and a half, something like that or whatever. So the next day then I called Phyllis Fleming, who we talked about earlier. And I said, Phyllis, I had an incident last night and I'm not going to be it. She says, yeah, I heard about that. She says, do you think you're going to write about it? I said, Phil, I haven't even thought about that yet. She says, well, if you think you might write about it, we probably should get a picture of you. I got a swollen eye, and, you know, my nose has been out of shape. I got, you know, scabs on my face.
That's some money shot, man.
So I'm thinking, really, do I need to do this? Anyway, okay, fine, send somebody over. So about, you know, half hour later, my doorbell rings and L.W. Ward walks in. If anybody knows L.W. Ward, first thing he says to me, he says, oh my God, you look worse than I thought. Anyway, he took my picture and left. I ended up doing a series of stories on getting beat up. I worried about that when I was in California. I didn't worry about it when I was in Cedar Rapids.
And did they ever make an arrest?
No. I didn't pay that close attention to the car. You know, yeah, they looked, but you know, there's only so much they can do.
And the fame of being in the paper wasn't enough to get them to reveal themselves?
I guess not,
yeah.
No.
All right, personal side note, where were you bowling?
Jubilee Lanes.
I thought maybe, all right, someday.
Remember Jubilee Lanes?
Yes,
yeah.
Jubilee Lanes.
Yeah.
Bowling, a Klein family interest. We'll talk about that another time. All right, so before we jump to 2013, when things are going to change for you again, are there a couple of rambling columns that pop immediately to mind when you think about your favorites, keeping in mind that there's at least one of your subjects in the room right now?
I love doing the one on the I did one on you too, Mr. Flyboy, didn't I? Uh-huh. All right. And maybe there's somebody else here that I did a story on. I don't know. But I enjoyed talking to all of the people that I talked to. I mean, to me, it's just fascinating. One of the things we didn't mention is that, I did a lot of stories of Lynn County as well as all out and about, you know? When I first started at the Gazette, one of my early feature stories was on a ghost tour of Lynn County. Right. And we went to Lafayette and to Alice, and then I had said a different town, but it wasn't. It was Flemingville, which was basically at that time was absolutely nothing. But I looked it up after we had our conversation because I wanted to get my facts straight.
There you go, fair enough.
You know?
Like a reporter.
At first, when I was talking to Rob, I said the third town was Paris. Well, it wasn't Paris. But in 1982, when I did my first Ramblin' column, that was Springtime in Paris.
Aha.
And so that was my first column, and it was in Lynn County.
I love it.
And so that's one of my favorite ones, just because of the idea. And because it was the first.
Yeah.
But I did as a reporter and doing my feature columns, and Carrie will attest to this, you get opportunities to do things that a lot of people don't, you know? Nobody ever gave me the option of walking on a wing, but I did fly in biplanes. I did take a hot air balloon ride up above Iowa City. I rode an elephant in the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. I spent a week with a CRST truck driver and we went to California and back. After the floods of 1993, I spent a week and went from the northern tip of Iowa, New Albin, all the way down to Keokuk, and did a whole series of stories on people who were impacted by the flood. And I was just amazed at how many people had been flooded out 2 or 3 times. They were mucking out their house and going to stay right where they were, you know?
Wow.
And that's just the idea of people in Iowa, which is why I think, I didn't really say this either, but, so I left Iowa twice. I left Iowa to go to the University of South Dakota, and I came back. I left Iowa to go to California, and I came back. California never seemed like home. Iowa was home. When I had the opportunity, I talked him into paying moving expenses. I talked him into doing that stuff, whatever. But, I was ready to come home.
Sure. So you and I tried to do some math the other day to try to estimate how many Ramblin' columns there are. What number did you finally decide was maybe close to right?
We came up with like 3,500, and then we came up with like 4,500, and it's probably somewhere in between there, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about, remember we have a book theme going on. You remember the book writing? Well, among the books that Dave has to his credit are some collections of those columns. And how many would you say are collected? It's 2 books, right?
The first book, the Gazette got a new printing press that was like going to be a print on demand, and they were looking for some kind of a project to do. So I proposed, I'm getting close to 30 years, that I've been rambling. It wasn't quite that. It was like 28 or I don't know, whatever. But anyway, I said, how about if we do a coffee table book on my columns? Maybe. Anyway, then it started getting some traction, and they said, yeah, let's do that. And so in November of 2011, the Gazette came out with my first book, which was, there's 100 and some columns in here. But as you can see, it's kind of a hard cover book, sits there, and it has, there I am. I'll do that. But it has, let's see, I just opened it up to one that was really nice. This is one here. But, so it's got nice big pictures as well as about 100 columns. And so we unveiled that at the Museum of Art.
Sure.
I had a book signing there, and then others. And, I really enjoyed putting that together. It was I don't know, it was reminiscing about things and whatever. And I came up with about 500 favorite columns, and they said, that's too many.
Sure.
So whittle it down to, I think there's a little over 100 there.
And what year does it come out again?
That was 2011.
2011.
Right.
Then 2 years later, you and the Gazette are going to have a different kind of conversation.
In 2013, newspapers are struggling. We all know that. They've been struggling for quite a while. And in 2013, things were a little tougher with the Gazette, and they decided that they need to downsize the newsroom. And so they got rid of about 10 or 12 of us. Basically said goodbye. A couple of them were people that had been there a year or so, 2 maybe. But most of us had been there at least 14 years. And so it was really kind of a sad time, with the Gazette. But, we understood what was going on too. Thankfully, I didn't spend all my, didn't quit any other times and spend my retirement funds. So I had some retirement, set up and this and that, whatever. And started a couple other things to try to make some money, but I decided to come out with another book too.
The next Ramblin' book?
And so that's when I came out and self-published a Ramblin' book on my own. I already had 400, left over from the first time. So it was a lot easier for me to put that together, and it gave me the experience of trying to put together a book. And so I did that, came out with that on my own, had a couple book signings and whatever. But as Rob and I will both attest to, you don't really make money writing and selling books.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Dang it. Yes, that is true. But you kept at it. You did some ghostwriting. You've written some histories. We're going to get to that novel in a minute. But you've written, quite a little pile of books.
I After I left the Gazette in 13, I did some telemarketing work for a while, which I thought my resume writing business in California was bad, but I'm just not a telephone. I talk too much. You know, when they have quotas and you're supposed to be on and off the phone, it's like, I don't even get to know these people. You know, it was just, and when you're 60 years old, it's kind of hard to change that, you know, attitude. And, you know, so, you know, we parted ways amicably. I still got a couple friends that work there, you know, but they knew that I didn't really fit in with what their idea was, and I knew I didn't really fit in and whatever, which again that's when I came out with the Ramblin' book. And I'd also had a couple other ideas that were passed along to me. One of them was that Ernie Burish, banker from Anamosa, who then also owned the Village Bank, which is now the Chrome Horse down in Newbo, was kind of thinking about doing a book, but he couldn't write it, whatever. So I went and talked to Ernie, and I'd met Ernie a couple other different times before on other columns that I'd done. And we got along great, and so I spent maybe 9 months going out to see Ernie once or twice a week, talk to him, give him what I'd already written. He was going to be 88 years old, so I came up with the idea that we're going to do this book in 88 chapters. And so each chapter was a story, and it had a lesson. And that's what Ernie liked about the book. And he paid me. He would pay me once a month for the work that I did. And then the book was all his. So he was able to take that then and sell it. He still sells. I see it there I can see it right there. He's been selling them time, and he keeps calling me up. Hey, order 50 more books for me. He sells them at Camp Courageous because he's a donor there, and he sells them at the Oxyoke Inn because travelers apparently like to stop and they'll see the cover and they say, that's interesting. They'll pick it up to read while they're...
Wait, is he getting rich publishing books?
He's probably made his money back from what he paid me. I don't know.
That's amazing.
You know? Yeah, so that one's still going on good.
Public service announcement from the Freelance Writers of America. Always hire a ghostwriter. We're always available.
Yeah. But this is the book there, and I think I see it right back there. That's Ernie's book, The Advantage of Being Born Poor. I came up with a couple of great ideas for titles. Ernie says, I'm paying for this. This is my title. That's the one he had in mind before we wrote one word. And you know what? It's been a good title for him. It really has been. Also then at that time, Rick Smith at the Gazette got an email from somebody who he had covered something at New Bow, maybe some a resurgence type of thing at New Bow or the city market down there, whatever. And they asked him if he'd be interested in writing a book about the New Bow, the Czech population in Cedar Rapids. He said, I wouldn't be, but he says, I know somebody who might. So he sent me an email. I made connections with the History Press, and then we came out with this book then in 2016, Czech Village and New Bohemia, History in the Heartland. All right? So I started working on that after I finished Ernie's book. Well, I was about done, and we were going to come out with it for that Christmas of 2015, and then my body had other ideas.
Ah, yes, it did. You kind of had a run of bad luck right there around then.
I kind of did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. 2013, by Gazette. 2014, I got divorced. We're still friends. I still love my stepdaughters. It's just great. And then 2015, I figured I'd better start doing some exercise, walking and stuff like that.
Oh, that'll teach you.
I felt, it will, yeah. And I felt kind of weird down here, just kind of like a tingling sensation or something. So I went to my physician or PA, whatever, and she said, that could be heart related. Let's have you go in and see a cardiologist. So I went into the cardiologist on a Friday, and they did the stress test, just me sitting there. Everything is fine. You got time? Let's do a stress test. Where before they just hooked me up as I was sitting there. Let's see, if that shows anything. So they hook up all these wires to me. I'm on the treadmill. It goes faster and faster. It inclines. After about 3 minutes, she shut it. I'm dying, and she shut it down. So I'm thinking, thank God, because it was supposed to last 7 or 8 minutes. She said, this doesn't look good. I'm thinking, uh-oh. Cardiologist comes in, this doesn't look good. What do you mean? He says, yeah, you have some blockage somewhere. They said, your circulation isn't going good. So we need to take a better look at this. This was a Friday afternoon. They said, we'll get you in Tuesday morning, and we're going to do, they put a dye in your veins and pass this machine over you to see if there's any blockages and stuff. So he did that Tuesday morning, and what he found was, well, he shut it down real quick. He says, there's nothing I can do for you. He thought he was going to put a stent in, or he thought he was just going to have to do medication, but I had 95% blockage in the left main artery, which is the one they call the widowmaker. He says, I'm not letting you leave the hospital unless you insist. If you insist, you're going to sign so much paperwork, you thought you bought a house. I said, well, that's fine, whatever. The surgeon came in, talked to me. Apparently I passed what he thought he needed to know. And by Wednesday morning at 7 o'clock, I was in surgery, and I was in surgery till afternoon. Triple heart bypass. Everything worked fine. That Saturday afternoon, they kicked me out of the hospital. Wow. Just amazing to me. So 8 days after I was diagnosed, I've had a hip triple heart bypass surgery, and I'm home. And I got to finish this book because I still got about 3 chapters I got to go in this, and I know they're waiting for it. Well, I told them that what I had, and they delayed it. So we didn't come out with it till March.
So the moral of the story is don't let anyone give you a treadmill test. No. That was the moral, right?
I don't think so, because, hey, everything's good. I mean, I couldn't believe all the pills I was taking and stuff like that afterwards, but all I'm doing is taking a baby aspirin a day. And my cholesterol medication, which I was taking before that, but that's it. So, I just feel so fortunate, I'm glad they didn't put stents or do other things in, because then that way, it's all my own body parts. So I have nothing to reject.
So he's had triple bypass surgery. Now, you may remember from earlier in our show, he's wanted to be a novelist since he was in high school. He quit his job in 1986 because he wanted to be a novelist. He's now had triple bypass surgery. It's 2015. He is not yet a novelist. What's coming up?
Yeah, some dreams, they never leave you.
That's right.
And some manuscripts never get lost.
Let's see, if you started in 86, you had hard copies.
Nightbeat. No, I had a computer. I bought my computer in 1983.
Early
little 9-inch green screen computer, but it was good. I had a printer. I revisited Nightbeat several different times and redid it this way, that way, whatever. But finally, I just said, I don't know how much time I've got left. I didn't have any other book projects to do or whatever. And so I started a couple of different books, fiction books, but I just didn't really get into them that much. And so I decided to revisit Nightbeat. And so I did that, came out with that in February of 2019. Yeah. Again, I just self-published it. I tried before, I tried to get somebody to pay me to do it, and it's just, it's just a lot of work. And that isn't what I really wanted to do. I wanted to write. I didn't want to, spend all that time. But there's a lot of different things I could have done with it. But it originally took place in 1986 in Cedar City, Iowa. Duh. Does anybody have any idea what Cedar City, Iowa is?
And as the name Nightbeat might suggest, it's also about your industry.
It's about 2 newspaper reporters. One covers the night beat and one covers the day beat. They are police reporters. And they have different ambitions, but both really do want to go on and become better reporters and this and that stuff. But the night beat reporter has kind of a shady past and also kind of suspect behavior. And so that's kind of what the intrigue of it is. But it takes place in Cedar City in 1986. So there's the 5-in-1 bridge, and there's the IE Tower and Green Square Park. The Gazette is the Argus, but it's the same building, So it is. And so people that read that, if you're familiar with Cedar Rapids at that time, you're familiar with, a lot of the scenes in the book. I did move some things around just to be a little bit more convenient for, what I was trying to do.
All right, we are almost to the question and answer portion of the event. But before that, when Dave and I were talking before, he said something that really struck me, maybe because, did I mention that I have a significant birthday this year? He was talking about arriving in Cedar Rapids 42 years ago and what that means in terms of the changes that he saw over time in this community, and also what that means when we look forward, like how long 42 years really is and how much changes.
42
I'll
years
let
from
you
now is
jump
going
in
to
there.
be 2063. Holy moly. But yeah, you get different perspectives on different things. It wasn't until I was probably in my 30s that I realized being born in 1953, I was only born 8 years after World War II ended. But yet when I'm reading it, when I'm in school, it seems like it was forever ago. But as you get older, and 5 years and 10 years aren't nearly as long, it's unbelievable. In 1979, when I moved to Cedar Rapids, the town was undergoing quite a change. 1979 is when the Five Seasons Center opened and Stouffer's Hotel. 1979 is when the interstate was finished through downtown. Before that, it had only gone to Wilson Avenue. Now it went up to St. Luke's. 1979 is when Westdale Mall opened.
You remember Westdale
Where's
Mall?
Westdale Mall now? But it did. The city changed a lot. Downtown started going down a little bit. Lyndale Mall was enclosed because of Westdale. Downtown, they built the Ground Transportation Center, hoping to keep people coming down. And Cedar Rapids still had the glorious one-way streets. I liked one-way streets.
Glorious one-way streets.
I am not for the two ways, I swore that I'd never go to PCI because they closed off 2nd Avenue. Little did I know, my heart had other ideas.
Well, and another thing we talked about were when you think about the history of the town in terms of libraries. In 1979, we were still in the Carnegie Library.
1979, when I was doing all my different things, one of my jobs was to cover the library board. They'd been talking for years about building a new library, so I got in on the end of that conversation as they were talking about building a new library. I think the one opened on 1st Street Southeast in 83. Does that sound right? 1983?
That's right, yeah.
And now we have another new library since then, thanks to the flood of 2008. But I really liked that library there that we had on 1st Street Southeast. For one, when I was married, my wife and the 3 kids, we'd always put a blanket out in front of the library and watch the fireworks from there.
There you go.
It was a great place to, and you could see it reflect off of the the what? No. The Great American Building, is it?
No, sure.
No, the Great American Building, is it?
Yeah, the APAC building.
Okay, wait.
One of those buildings.
Yeah. It was like a mirror windows type. Whatever. Anyway, it was really pretty cool. It was almost like a double fireworks thing.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, and libraries are such an interesting way to think about the community, right? Because as they build new libraries, the way they think about libraries and how they serve their communities changes. Right? There's a big difference from the Carnegie Library to the library that now faces it, and that has to do with changes in the way society thinks about the uses and purposes of libraries. So
Unbelievable, yeah. And also, the History Center's undergone quite a few changes too.
one or
since
two,
then.
yes.
My first visit to the History Center was back on 8th Avenue when Linda Langston was in charge. And when I went in, I walked in this door, and it was just like a little really crowded building, and she emerges from behind a sheet hanging over a doorway, and I thought, what is going on? I mean, this is really weird. Well, she didn't want me to see what was back there because it was nothing but, piles and piles of what looked like junk, because this, it was in the early days of really getting the History Center going, And then, of course, from there, it was to the old Rapid Chevrolet building, and now here to what's a perfect place. Nice historical building, the Grant Wood studio right there next door, and just, yeah, this is just wonderful.
Now, I do have it on good authority that the staff here tries to keep Jason behind a sheet.
Yeah.
He's back there giving me the eye.
That's probably just
down.
That's just on Halloween, right?
Right. All right, we have arrived at Q&A. Do we have any questions for Dave? Yes.
Thinking way back, did you always know you wanted to write? Was that something that was always your goal?
It was pretty much this teacher that I had when I was a sophomore in high school. Yeah. I grew up reading 3 newspapers a day. My parents, we lived in Marshalltown, and my parents took the local Times-Republican, and they also took the Des Moines Register in the morning and the Des Moines Tribune in the evening. So, you know, I was always reading newspapers, I was reading books. So I grew up reading, and so, you know, once somebody said, "I like your writing," I thought, oh, that's good. You know, so I listened to that and got that in my head, and I've had it, you know, there ever since. And it's been fun. It was like, I guess one of the reasons I didn't try harder about being, quote, a novelist was that I really love Cedar Rapids. It's just, to me, it's the perfect sized town. And I really enjoyed my job at the Gazette. If I would have had to go cover the police beat all the time or sit in courtrooms and do stories about criminals and things, I don't think my newspaper career would have lasted nearly as long as it did. But because, I mean, I think this is probably why, you know, everybody knows journalists, you don't really get paid that much, you know, whatever. And I think that was part of my bosses would always remind me several times a year, you have the best job here, you know that, you know? So they didn't have to worry about paying me so much anymore, you know, whatever. But it was true, you know? I had the best job working for somebody, but yet not really reporting to anybody, because I came up with my own ideas, and they were happy with those, the public was happy with that, and so it was the best of both worlds. I got a steady paycheck, but yet I was my own boss. And I just got to meet so many wonderful people, and you know, it's fun to run into some of those people again. Every once in a while, I've been gone from the Gazette now 8 years. So I'm glad, you know, we have a good group of people showing up here, because sometimes people forget that, whatever. But every once in a while, somebody will come up to me and they'll say, you know, "Are you Carrie J. Hahn?" No.
I hope you say yes.
No, Carrie knows what I'm talking about. They will, you know?
I wish I had $1 for every column I had written in the Gazette.
Okay, there we go. Uh-huh.
Or you all the time.
Well, and we were in several different places together too and stuff. And I remember the Purple House in Monticello. You stole that from me. But I wanted to steal your bowling on I-380, but that didn't work as good in the newspaper as it did on TV.
It always comes back to bowling.
Yeah.
So,
Purple House, how could anybody miss it?
Oh my God, it was great, wasn't it?
I'm interested. I'm glad you're both here. I'm interested in whether you think the media landscape, particularly on the local level, will ever get back to a place where a Ramblin' or an Iowa Traveler is part of the mix, or if we've moved past it and suffered a loss as a result.
Just quickly, I'll say, unfortunately, I don't think so. And I wish they would. I think some of the people don't understand the importance of good storytelling, the importance of paying attention to the community that you are in. When I came back to the Gazette in 1990, and that's when we went with the Iowa Today section, which was about Iowa. That section was specifically brought out from what used to be the full front section of the paper to highlight the idea that we had people here in Iowa that were interesting. And I think unfortunately, all the other ways you can get information today means that that's not really going to happen anymore. And we have a lot of people out there that call themselves journalists that aren't. You know, I mean, on the social media and this and that stuff and whatever. And I could get into a lot of stuff about that, but I'm not going to. But you know what I mean? Just because you tell a story doesn't mean you're a journalist, doesn't mean you check the facts, doesn't mean, you know, you keep your subjects' feelings in mind, and just a lot of different things, you know. I don't know what Carrie thinks, but you kind of agree?
Yeah, I pretty well agree.
It is gone, and I think it's sad. It's too bad, because that helped build community, and community keeps the town alive. You know, it's nice to be able to talk to your neighbors and know who they are. You know, now a lot of times they're just strangers out there. That's too bad. Exactly. I mean, that's what I liked about newspapers was somebody else did all the editing of the stories and put them all together for me, and as I'm turning the page, well, that looks kind of interesting. And then I start reading it. I'm glad I read that. But I would not have seen that if somebody else hadn't found it and then put it in the newspaper. Same thing with different things on TV and at that time and whatever, you know? Yeah. Being independently owned, it didn't really change all that much at the Gazette. Not maybe as much as some people would think. The thing is, when people read letters to the editor, they have their own ideas in mind of what it is. And if they don't agree with it, you know, and it had a liberal point of view, then the Gazette's a liberal rag. You know what I mean? But same thing, if it's conservative, you know, letter and a liberal, you know, then, oh man, you guys are just so conservative, you know, but the Gazette, I think for the most part, was very well balanced. It's really hard to say now today, I don't know, you know. I just don't, I don't know.
You didn't feel that kind of influence.
I didn't really feel it that much. But what I think is, though, what I think I'm seeing more and more, though, is, I mean, I did columns about sometimes my personal life and this and that stuff, whatever. Like as I was flipping through one of my books, I ran into the thing and I said, oh my God, that was 20 years ago. I was married, we took my 3 stepdaughters to their drive-in movie theater for the first time. And so it was a picture of that. And that was 20 years ago we did that, you know? And so every once in a while I would write stories. And so then, you know, I mean, I'm writing about my family or this and that, so I can put some of my opinion in there, whatever. But even doing my rambling column, I didn't really throw that much of my opinion into the other ones, you know. My subject, okay, that's fine, because I'm quoting them, you know, or I'm regurgitating something that they said or whatever. I think that's one of the problems with journalism right now is that too many of the reporters think that they have to be the star. And so they put in some of their own little twists. And sometimes it's just adjectives or adverbs that they use that they don't need to use. But it tends to influence the way you look at the story and look at the subject of the story.
All right. Any more burning questions? All right.
Well, when I was first there, I did quite a bit, you know, all of them, you know. And every once in a while, when I'd do a story and they knew how they wanted to use it, well, they would send a photographer with me. But in my rambling days, that was pretty rare, you know. Like I know one time I went up and covered the county fair in National, Iowa, which is Clayton
Not as
County.
good as the Clay County Fair.
Huh?
Not as good as Clay County.
No. It's your typical small community county fair. It was great. And I know Dwayne Kroc, then a photographer at the Gazette, came up with me for the day, and we did that. Because, you know, they wanted to use multiple pictures with this, you know, make it a feature page. And it's kind of hard when I'm trying to do stories and I'm not necessarily, or take notes and this and that stuff, and it's hard to kind of take a picture too at the same time when you're doing something like that. And so there were occasions and I was glad to have a photographer with me. It made it really great. And in fact, too, the last column that's in my first book, the one that the Gazette published, is about a guy who wanted a pine box. He died, and he wanted to be buried in a handmade pine box. His family made the pine box after he died for him. And so we did that story. And again, Dwayne Kroc was the photographer that went with me on that, which was very important because I'm talking to people in this, and he could go a little different place or get a little different aspect of it. And we used, again, 3 or 4 pictures with that one. And so, there were some situations when it was great, to have 2 people, and it really did turn out better.
I think there was one more question here.
What's the lead time now from when a story has to be finished and it goes to press? I used to carry an afternoon paper. It would get held up sometimes. It was always our fault,
Of course.
But anyway, I just was wondering.
When the Gazette was an afternoon paper, that just broke up the whole day for us. We'd come in the morning, 7 or 8, whatever, do any of the stories that we needed to get done. Different pages had different deadlines. Pretty much then what I remember were 2 editions. The first edition and the city edition. And the first edition deadline, I want to say, was 11:30 in the morning. And the city was something like 1:45. And we expected those papers to be out on the streets by 2. So I feel sorry for some of the people that were working behind the scenes to crank out the paper and get those out and distributed. After we went to an evening paper, it was pretty much the sports were the ones that had to worry about the deadline so much. And at one time it was like 1 in the morning, and then they moved it to 12:30, and then midnight. They kept moving it up because I think during the week the goal was to have it on everybody's doorstep by 6 in the morning.
Yep.
And Sundays by 7.
Absolutely.
And so it was, it was a lot of work in the nighttime, for doing all that stuff.
This is why they make you submit the book reviews. If you happen to be the Gazette's book reviewer, those are due Monday at 9 to appear on Sunday, right? Because they don't have time to mess with me closer to the deadline.
Well, and that has to do with, too, advanced pages being done and stuff like that. And so you're always doing those things, too. A daily edition, is going to have pages with maybe 15 deadlines that are maybe 15 minutes apart. And so that, you work on this, that stuff. And then all of a sudden, something happens, at 12:30, and you got 15 minutes. You got to get something in, And so you do that, whatever you can. But yeah, different stories have different deadlines. My column, I usually had to have it done. Let's say if it was going to be a Wednesday column, I was supposed to have that done by the time I left Monday. So they'd have all day Tuesday then to look at it and put it on and whatever. Because it was a feature type of story. So it wasn't anything that had to be right on deadline.
All right, we like to close with the same question each time. We like to give our guest an opportunity to give himself some advice. So if you could go back and talk to the younger you, other than avoid earthquakes, what advice would you give the younger Dave?
We didn't talk about this before, did we?
No.
You didn't ask me this question
We like
before.
to. The only way you know about this is if you watch previous episodes. So
I did. I did. I don't know. There's a lot of twists and turns, but that's what life is all about. And so I guess to a younger self, I'd say, follow your instincts. That's kind of what I did. Who knows? You can look back on your life and you know that there are sometimes you made a decision that completely changed it. When I decided to go to California, I had no idea. I thought I was going there for good. Well, little did I know that 3 years later I'd be coming back here. And I mean, I'm glad I did. But I don't know. Life can be a good ride. And maybe I'm saying this because I had a second chance after my triple heart bypass, And so that doesn't mean, you need to all of a sudden become a fitness fanatic or, all this and that stuff. It's just that follow your instincts, follow your nose, roll with the punches, and wake up tomorrow morning knowing today's going to be a better day than it was yesterday.
I like that. I think that's a good place to stop. So, first, let's thank Dave for this wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.
Some quick reminders, Dave's books can be found, and so can Ed Gorman's books, anywhere fine books are sold, including on that thing we call the internet, though we would encourage you to buy local, even here in the shop. And we'd like to thank Mike and Esther Wilson again for supporting this program. We really do. We feel so blessed to have you here in person with us tonight. Thank you for coming out. We will see you again for this program very, very soon. Thanks very much.
Again, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I appreciate it.